Maybe you have an old GPU. Maybe you bought one of these used GPUs from these miners selling off the rigs, and for whatever reason, you're not able to get the proper thermal performance out of your GPU anymore, and you're not sure why. Well, guys, you might need to replace the thermal pads and the thermal paste on your GPU. But how? I'll show you. Hey guys, it's Chris with Tech Vibe. Today I'm going to be breaking down the 1080 Ti and trying to show you guys how you would actually replace the thermal pads and the thermal paste on a GPU if you're having issues with your GPU thermal throttling or getting too hot. Whatever the case may be, if you happen to bought one of these used mining cards that have just been completely abused, the thermal pad and the thermal paste completely shot, and guys, it just might be time to slap some new stuff on there.
This is fine.
So guys, I'm going to be showing you how to do this. I'm going to be letting you guys see how I do it. And guys, I'll just be honest with you. I've not broken down this particular card before, but the process is still relatively the same. So we're going to be going through this together. And if you happen to have this card or have some sort of concerns about how to do this, guys, I'm going to be showing you. So when you are breaking down a GPU, guys, you want to make sure that you have the right tools. Now, obviously, we're going to need screwdrivers for this, guys, but it's going to have different size screws, and you want to be aware of that. So having a set like this is going to be definitely helpful. Now, I do have my electric screwdriver. I've talked about this in my most recent video, and guys, this is a great one. I love it, but I'm probably not going to get to use it for a lot of this. So you want to make sure that you have a good set, because different size screws are definitely going to happen. You also want to make sure that you have high quality thermal pads and thermal paste, guys. You're trying to improve the thermals here, and you want to use good thermal pads and good thermal paste, and I definitely recommend these products right here from Thermal Grizzly. I'll have this stuff linked in the description if you're interested in checking it out. So we are going to possibly do some cleaning on the GPU as well. Looked like it was a little dusty, so having a little duster and little picks to get in between crevices, guys, is going to be important here. So we're going to be trying to just basically refurb this thing and make it look new and run new again. So we're going to do our best to fix this thing up and its thermals. Also, guys, you're going to be cleaning up thermal paste, so you're going to need some isopropyl alcohol and some paper towels. Just make sure you have the right tools for the job. You don't want to get stuck in the middle here, guys. So starting off with disassembling this GPU, we are going to go ahead and start with the retention screws. And you can usually find these, they're usually the bigger screws on the back plate. They look like the ones that I'm beginning to undo right now. But we're going to go ahead and get these all undone, and I just want to give you guys some expectation of how I'm going to go about doing this video. I'm going to be doing a little bit of skipping, but letting you guys see for the most part what I got going on, but I won't painstakingly go through this and let you guys have to drag through every single screw. Now, it's a good practice when you are disassembling a GPU to go ahead and try to diagram out your screws in the same position that you took them out. This kind of helps you make sure that you keep everything in its place and you don't get too lost. Now, obviously, this GPU is really dirty, and that's not going to fly with what we're trying to accomplish today. So we're going to go ahead and clean this thing up, and we're probably going to have to pull this thing out a few different times during this video because, well, it's pretty dirty. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and move to the smaller screws. And guys, like I said, mapping out these screws is going to help you out in the long run. So definitely do that. Try to draw it out in the same way that you are taking them apart as you see me doing here. Now, it is possible that you run into what is known as a warranty sticker, or at least that's what I'm going to refer to it as. And, well, right to repair, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But you might run into it. You're going to have to remove the sticker so you can get to the screw. Just be aware of that. I wouldn't worry too much about it, and I'm not too concerned about it because, well, this thing's past warranty anyway, so I'm trying to improve it. Got to do what I got to do. Then we're just going to continue to take off screws, and like I said, guys, draw it out. Draw it out while you're doing it. don't lose your screw position. Once all the screws are removed, we can go ahead and try to separate the back plate from the PCB, and you don't want to try to strongman this process. Just be slow about it, and you might have thermal pads that are being stubborn, and that's okay. It's just slowly do it, slow pressure, start separating. Now, much in line with what I've been talking about with these screws, guys, you want to continue to try and lay things out as you are taking them apart so you can put it together easily. So I'm going to keep the same layout as I was doing with the screws, and I recommend you do the same. Now, I actually missed a couple of the screws from before, so I had to come back and do those, but I get them all out and I lay it out just the same. Now, the PCB was pretty dirty on the back, so we're going to go ahead and clean this thing off too, because we don't want any dirt possibly messing with the cooling potential. So we're going to get this cleaned off, and I would definitely do the same if I were you. Back plate's clean, back part of the PCB is done. Now we're going to be trying to remove the heatsink from the PCB itself. And you're going to run into where you have fan connections, as you can see here, and we're going to be needing to unplug this thing so we can safely remove the heatsink from the PCB. You might have to use tweezers like you see me doing here. You want to make sure you get a good grip on it. Just however you got to do this part, guys. You need to make sure you're careful and delicate with it. During this process, I actually found that it helped me a little bit to try and pry my finger in there and get a little bit of separation. And once again, guys, once I got that off, just slowly pulling. I'm not giving it too much force. I don't want to break anything. So just a little bit at a time around the sides. Don't try to get in here and just super strong man this. Slow and steady is the key to victory. You will see. And there we go. We got it separated. So looking at this thing, you can see that the thermal pads are looking a little rough. Now that could have something to do with me pulling it apart right there, but the fact that it was kind of leaving entrails of itself on other ones definitely indicated of thermal pads that either weren't that great of quality or definitely could use a good upgrade. But surprisingly enough, my thermal paste doesn't seem like it would be that bad. So when you're dealing with thermal pads, you want to try to make sure that you are getting as close as you can to the cutout of the original. Now, sometimes companies skip and don't make it big enough, but you can kind of just use your best judgment on that point. You definitely don't want to go smaller than. So we're going to try to take these scissors. We're going to try to do the same thing was matching up this copper here, and we're just going to size it up and cut it the best that we can. Honestly, already it's looking far superior than what it was. Usually with thermal pads, there are two sides on them, little white films that you're going to need to remove if you're going to want the heat transfer to actually work. So definitely make sure that you don't just leave them on. We're going to go around here and try to continually line up and put thermal pads where there were thermal pads, and we're essentially what we're doing is covering up the VRAM here. Now we are missing some of the thermal pads on this heatsink here because they decided to stick to the other side of the PCB, and you can see them there. But we're just going to go ahead and go all the way around, do our best to match up these squares here. Might not be able to get it perfectly, but we're going to do the best we can. I figured a little time lapse here would probably be a little bit easier to consume, so let's speed it up for you. I do want to caution you guys though, when you are buying these particular thermal pads, if you do decide to use the ones I use, they're not cheap, they're great quality, but it only comes with 2 strips. Now when I was initially going to replace all my thermal pads, I actually didn't have enough to replace the ones on the back plate because, well, I just didn't have enough. I thought that it came with more than 2 strips, but it doesn't. And I ended up needing about 3 for this, just for doing the PCB. So keep that in mind, guys. Now, as I'm starting to wrap up these little corners, these little squares that I'm doing here, I start to actually realize I don't have enough thermal pads to do the entire card. So I'm starting to try to reserve them a little bit and trying to kind of see which ones need the thermal pad replacement the most. So we're going to go ahead, get this die cleaned off, get the alcohol and clean off the thermal paste on the die, and then start to try to remove the rest of the thermal pads that are, well, don't need to be there. So as I mentioned, I'm trying to get rid of all of the dirt and dust that I can on the PCB. So I'm going to continue to clean any dust on the board that I'm seeing and trying to use my tweezers to get rid of any excess thermal pads, because one thing that you don't want, guys, is thermal pads in places that they're not supposed to be. Because what can happen is you can transfer heat to pieces or parts of the board that may not necessarily be able to handle that amount of heat that this VRAM can actually generate. So I definitely would just caution you to keep thermal pads where thermal pads are supposed to be. Now, staying on theme, guys, just replacing thermal pads where they're needed to be replaced and trying to line it up the best we can and getting the most accurate fit possible. So just cleaning in between the VRAM here, trying to make sure there's no excess, making sure we have a good contact because you're gonna want that. Now, working a little bit backwards here, we're going back to the heatsink because we're actually going to be replacing these thermal pads here too. As I mentioned, guys, I wasn't sure I was going to have enough, so I'm just kind of filling it out, trying to make sure I don't screw myself and destroy a thermal pad when I don't have enough to replace it. So we actually do here, so we're just lining that up, making sure we had the right fit, and we did, so we're putting it on there. Now, another thing that we actually want to point out here, where you see me putting these small pieces of thermal pad on the PCB, this is something you want to be on the lookout for here, because you can find little pieces of VRAM or whatever that component actually is on the PCB that may be away from a group and may just need an additional thermal pad, just kind of oddball by itself. So just kind of pay attention when you initially pull off that PCB. Hopefully you haven't pulled off all your thermal pads by this point, so you can catch it and make sure you do that. So now we're moving on to the thermal paste and applying that. And with this particular one, we are going to be making sure we spread it all out and get a even coverage on the die. You do not want to leave an area open. We're not going to be doing the die method here with this one, because we want to make sure there is no sort of area that does not have coverage here. So we're looking for an even application, and it looks like we got that, so we're good. Now at this point, thermal pads are on. We can begin to try to reassemble the GPU. So you do want to go ahead and start hooking up your fan connections and just be looking at those. You might have 1 to 2 depending on your card For this particular card, there was actually 2. So just do your best to slowly put this thing back together. This is not a process you want to rush. You want the application of your thermal paste to be even, and you want to make sure that you're putting this on the right way. Now, while I'm actually putting this together, I'm trying to make sure that my thermal paste isn't touching the heat sink yet. So I'm not applying much pressure because I don't want an uneven application when pressure starts getting pushed on here. I want it on there as even as possible. So I've got everything lined up, and now I'm going to begin to start reassembling the back plate. And I'm going to start with the tension screws here so I can get a even application with my thermal paste. Now, just like with GPUs, guys, I'm gonna be alternating corners here, and I'm not gonna be going ham on my tightening. Make sure you don't do that. You want an even application, so I'm just alternating my screws here, and I'm not tightening down until the very end. Now I've got all my screws in, all my tension screws, and now I'm going to go ahead and move on to all the rest of the screws before I start tightening those down. So we're just rebuilding, guys, and like I've been saying, having that pattern drawn out is going to help you substantially when you're putting everything back in order. So just work your way through it, putting the screws back where they go. Not too difficult as long as you got everything drawn out. So hopefully you guys followed that step. But just screwing them all back together. And just as a last caution, I'm double checking my fan connections and making sure everything is tight because I don't want to come back to this. Hopefully it appears that everything's good. Looks like everything's in the right place and right order. GPU's looking clean. I think we did it. There it is, guys. That is how you break down a GPU, clean it up, repaste it, re-thermal pad it, mostly. Just make sure you have enough thermal pads. Clearly these only come with 2, so keep that in mind. These only come with 2, so you might need 2 packs or 3. But guys, that's it. Guys, if you found this video helpful, please consider hitting that like and subscribing. Guys, I do my best to help out on this channel. You know, I've never taken apart this particular card before. I did it real time with you guys, trying to figure it out and navigate it. And guys, that's what I try to do. I try to help out as much as I possibly can on this channel. So if this helps you at all, please hit that like, hit that subscribe, join the community. Would love to have you. That's all I got for you. And remember, it's a vibe, a tech vibe, specifically. We'll see you.